So, hi. This book made me genuinely mad for 2 solid days after I finished it. I picked up Metal Slinger by Rachel Schneider on a whim. I had been eyeing it from across the store for a couple weeks, and it struck my fancy. And it had a solid 4.2 on Goodreads, so I figured, like, it should be fine, right? It should be good. And, like, the description seemed okay. Like, I thought it'd be a good time, and I'll be honest, it was a whole lot of nothing. And these tabs kind of don't really do it justice, but we're just gonna go through it. Um, I do want to know why it has a 4.2 on a Goodreads though, because it's kind of wild. But like I said, we'll get into it. For those who are just joining in, hi, I'm Sarah. I am trying to discover my joy of reading, or my love of reading again, after about 8 years of not reading anything. So I am kind of just on a journey of figuring out what I like again. I used to read a lot of YA fantasy and dystopian back when that was a big thing, back in like the 2010s, that kind of thing. But then I just kind of stopped reading because of just reasons, kind of happens sometimes. Let's see. I have been pretty successful in like a lot of the books I read, but this is kind of one of the couple of exceptions that I've had thus far. If you want to know what I've read so far, aside from Metal Slinger, you can take a look at my other video, which I'll link in the card, which is just like wrapping up basically what I read within the first month-ish of starting to read again. Spoiler alert, there's a lot actually, and I think a lot more than I thought I'd read, getting back into it. Okay, so I have to be kind of mean for this video. I don't usually like rocking the boat. And so if I seem a little hesitant to say certain things, or, sorry, my laptop's over here. I'm recording my audio separate, so hopefully I can get that synced right. It's a little nerve-wracking to be publicly critical of works, especially creative works, that do have a pretty passionate audience around it. With that being said, don't if anyone feels like they have to go and berate the author for making Metal Slinger, don't. That's just weird. Okay, just don't do that. And if you like Metal Slinger, don't take this personally. Okay, just it didn't do it for me. But if it does it for you, that's cool. Writing in any form of art is pretty personal. There's no doubt that she has been rattling these characters around in her head for at least a couple years. So I don't want her to feel like she's done something wrong, because that's far from it. And I do want to encourage her to keep writing in the fantasy genre, because there is promise. There are some really cool concepts in this book that really should be fleshed out more. Um, this is also, I believe, one of her first like fantasy romance or romantasy books ever. So like there's room for growth, right? With that being said, let's get into the video. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you like this video. And like I said, if you want to see what else I've been reading, you can go check out my first video, which is on what I had been reading, like between like June 22nd and like beginning of August. So yeah, anyway, so part one, I guess, is we got to do a little synopsis. Basically, Bryn has been living with the Alaha people since she was 13, but also the book says 12. I think the book really does try to establish her as an unreliable narrator. But it doesn't do it too well, honestly. I don't know, because there's some points where it doesn't feel like it's meant to be unreliable, but more so, she forgot. There's the first quote where it talks about, it's on page 25, so if you want to follow along with me. This is on Kindle Unlimited, by the way, so, I didn't realize that, but it's on Kindle Unlimited. But I have my physical book. Anyway, so basically Bryn has been with the Alaha people since she was 12. In this piece, she's talking about being, whoops, my book, talking about being made fun of by like people in the thing, because she's seen as an outsider because she's an orphan. See, I don't bother looking at the offender, knowing it's Paul and his pack of henchmen. They've been the most vocal regarding my social status since I joined the guard with them at 12. And the betrayal of my crimson cheeks would give away my humiliation. Anyway, so she's been training with the Alaha Guard since she was 12 or 13. I'll talk about the 13 in a second if I can find it. The guard, I guess, is very selective, and when they're 18, they graduate, and they're going to this port in Kenta, which is like... Kenta's the mainland. And this is the only point on the mainland that they ever get to go to, because the Alaha people do not live on the mainland. They live what I assume to be a mangrove forest in the ocean, but it is never quite properly established where the Alaha people live. So you're kind of like forced to just kind of make an idea of your own. I believe that they live in a saltwater mangrove forest, but you are able to make your own thing. Just know that they're not able to live on land, and that's why I think it's a mangrove forest. For those who don't know, mangroves are saltwater trees, and there's a few different breeds that exist at different levels of salinity in the water. If you go to Florida or like anywhere really along the like Gulf Coast of America, you'll see them a lot. I don't know really where else they're native to. They're probably all around the world, but that's kind of where it is. If you've been to the Florida Keys or you live in Florida, you've most definitely seen mangroves. On page 89, she says, this is about like in regards to her like finally graduating the guard. And it says, today should have been full of celebration and excitement, finally accomplishing what I've worked for since the age of 13. But basically, there's one point where she says she's been with the people since 12, but she also says that she's been with them since she was 13. So I think this is meant to establish her as like an unreliable narrator, but what I will say is that Schneider doesn't really let her, not Schneider, Schneider doesn't really lean into this enough to make it very compelling, and so it just kind of comes along as like writing errors. That being said, Bryn is an amnesiac. I don't know if I mentioned that she's an amnesiac and an orphan, so she doesn't remember anything supposedly since before she joined the Alaha Guard at 12 or 13, whenever it actually was. When the book wants to like do some actual like world building, it doesn't really do any or character building. It's pretty direct. It doesn't really do actions or anything like that. It'll be like so and so is like duh. And you're like, oh, cool, thanks. I could have actually done that through their actions, but you know, that's cool. Back to the plot. The port of Kenta, it's a market, and that is the only place on land that they're able to go to without breaching a treaty. The Laha were banished to the mainland for like about a century ago, I think it says in the book. But she's going with three of her trainee friends. She's going with Messer, with Aurora, and Kai, which we need to know about Kai. He's the son of the captain of the Alaha people, which I do like this alternative name for like their leader. I think it's pretty good actually. It does kind of like lean into the idea of them being a sea people, but like I said, I would like some more, I guess, establishment of like what the island is. Kai is also Bryn's initial love interest, and I say initial because we're gonna meet another guy, and heads up, I don't like him. She and Kai start dancing, and they're technically not supposed to dance because when they're the Laha people do like a matching ceremony thing, like think like Ali Conde matching. So once they finish primary school, they're not allowed to have intimate contact with other people. Bryn and Kai break this pretty often, most notably within the market, where they decide to dance with each other. There's like a band playing and they decide to dance together. Bryn kind of quickly kind of freaks out because she's pretty insecure within her idea of like what she is to Kai. She doesn't feel like her position as like she's not worthy of his attention because she is an orphan, even though Kai is like pretty actively pursuing her. Which I like Kai. I will say I do like Kai. But I feel like that they don't really have much chemistry. And at first I kind of chalked it up to like her hesitance to be his. But even like later in the book when we do meet like the actual like main love interest, like I still don't feel like there was anything to it. She goes running off into the market, which she's not supposed to do because they're supposed to travel in pairs due to other treaty things and not appearing hostile. Bryn is like, well, Bryn's looking at like some jewelry and stuff like that, kind of trying to blend into the crowd. She is caught by a soldier who tries to frame her for stealing. And she's like, hey, what the heck? I'm not stealing. And he's like, yes, you are. Let me cut your hands off. And you're going to put your hand on this wall so I can cut your hand off. In reality, it's just a cover up, so there's something else. But, and she's like, no, what the heck? That's weird. And he forces her hand on the wall and she feels something like course through her, basically. And it's like, spoiler alert, it's magic. After that happens, Messer and Kai have caught up. They fight off the other people, like the group of soldiers around them. And they're like, oh crap, we just like breached a century-old treaty between the Alaha and the other people on this continent. They do, okay, real quick, backpedal just a little bit. They do mention at the very beginning of the book that they want to go back on land, which is fair. When they're coming back to the boat after they've fought off all these soldiers, Aurora ends up setting fire to a couple of market stands in order to create a diversion so they can get to the rest. They can get back to the boat in time, but they've already gotten back to the boat, which is so it kind of comes across as pretty pointless, is what it feels like. Anyway, when they get back to the Alaha, like the Alaha Island mangrove forest, the Alaha mangrove forest, we're just gonna call it the Alaha mangrove forest. Aurora is accused of trying to incite rebellion, and she's just like, well, what if I was just being silly and she's told to she's put in the brig overnight for that. Yeah, but anyway, the arson just feels like it's arson for like a cool like cool guys don't look at explosions thing, you know. That was my interpretation, and they're all reprimanded for this, by the way. Like it's not just Aurora who gets heat for it, but Aurora takes most of the blame, mostly for her arson. But yeah, just keep the rebellion thing in your pocket for about 400 pages. So after Aurora's been put in the brig and everything like that, Kai and Bryn have this sort of little like cute little moment where they're supposed to be like where they're talking about the matching ceremony upcoming and that kind of thing. And Kai finally gets Bryn on board to be his match. Oh, real quick, back on that like intimacy thing. So there's a couple points in the book where like or what before like, you know, pre main love interest where like Bryn and Kai are like actively what I would think would count something as like intimate contact where they would be like leaning on each other because if holding hands is considered like intimate contact and like dancing like you know not even like you know slow dancing but just like dancing in the plaza you know think like really stereotypical plaza dancing right that would be like intimate contact. I would think that like leaning on one another would be considered that too, because they do that a couple times. Also, Bryn and not Acker, Bryn and Kai get thrown in the brig because they Kai kisses Bryn like right in front of his dad. And he's like, "Hey, dude, like I've turned a blind eye before, like, but I can't because you were. This was just like public." So they get thrown in the brig. More on that later. A few days after arriving back on the Alaha mangrove forest, some boats from Kenta appear, and we come face to face with Acker, who is the soldier that framed Bryn for stealing, and he's thrown in the brig like pretty much right off the bat. Um, and he refuses to speak to anyone but Bryn, and is like, you know, brooding and dark. I have issues with how his character is kind of portrayed. I don't think he was done very well. But like I said, I think I would prefer if the book was like written from his perspective. Anyway, so yeah, he gets left to die at high tide. Um, and I should mention, I'm a little this is what I'm meaning about world building and some inconsistency within the book. So on here on normal Earth, high and low tide happens within 6 hour increments, roughly 6 hour increments. It's like give or take. And if you don't, like if Acker is left to die at high tide overnight, how were Bryn and Kai not dead for being left in the brig overnight because of high tide? So this becomes interesting because of that. I'm like, why? Like, what would not like how okay, Acker gets put in the same cell that Bryn gets put in. That's why I'm more questioning this. It's like because it's not even like a matter of like oh they might have been like in a higher up cell from where Bryn and Kai were. It's the exact same cell that Bryn was in, and they're leaving him to uh at high tide. But Bryn for some reason decides to save him. She goes in and he like okay so also on this first interaction with him out like in the brig he's like I can smell you and that's weird and I'm just like or I could he was like I can smell that you were in here and it's like okay that's a choice um and it comes up that he can like smell the iron in his blood or in her blood and that's how he knew it was her. More on that later. Not really, but there is some. He does have a pretty cool ability. I should mention that Metal Slinger is named after him. It's not named after Bryn. It's named after him. Spoiler alert. We'll get more to that too. In like my afterthoughts, right? Um, but yeah, I don't know why Acker was left to die at high tide, and how Bryn and Kai didn't die at left high tide if he was in the exact same cell as Bryn, and they most definitely experienced high tide in the break. Because it's not established otherwise. When you're writing a fantasy story, assume that the reader thinks that anything that you have not established otherwise is the same as it works on Earth. So high and low tide to me occurs the same on Earth, 6 hour intervals. And it require twice a day for each one, right? Um, so yeah, Bryn decides just out of the blue, let me save Acker, which I guess there's not really much justification needed for saving someone's life, but especially when they threaten to cut off your hands and you have no other ties to this guy. Um, Interesting. But yeah, Acker's magic gets very minimal exposition throughout this entire book, which is pretty tragic. Like I said, I do actually think it's pretty interesting, and I do think that he had potential as a character. But it gets Schneider really doesn't have very solid walls for what her characters are. Um, there's a difference between having a dynamic character that changes throughout the course of the story and having a very floppy character that doesn't seem to really have much going for them. And that sounds really mean. What I'm saying is basically there were points where I felt like characters were not acting in the same way that they were established to be like previously. So in like one scene, Acker would be this really like gruff and like brooding, think stereotypical male romantic character, and then like next time the next like moment he would just be like silly goofy puppy guy. And I'm not taking like there's a way to have this kind of like duality within a character. Like I do really like Zayden in Fourth Wing and how his portrayal of this is, where he's kind of like scary dog privilege but also like just a chill guy, right? Just a chill guy. I do think Schneider misses the mark on this because it becomes so back and forth and just really without any sort of rhyme or reason that he kind of flips between these roles. Also, just in general, he's not a very great. There's some things I just don't like about how he'll flip on a dime. We'll get to that. We'll get there. So yeah, so while they're like at some point, Acker just kind of lore drops like Bryn's entire past on her. Um, and this is I remember seeing someone talk about like a different book, or like Amnesiac, like as amnesia as like a trope, and how it is almost always done. There's very few examples of it being done really well. Um, there's a way of doing amnesia where you are doing it in a way that like feels cohesive and you're not like just like randomly getting back memories. There's rhyme and reason. There's things that trigger it. I don't know how amnesia works in real life, but I don't think that someone who is just like lore dropped, like, oh, you were actually the missing princess of a place called Melee, is like, even if you're trying to be the unreliable narrator, why would you react calmly to this? That is to say, Rin takes this news so well. She's like, "Oh, my name's Jovi. Okay, fine." And so they call her Jovi for the rest of the book. And if I flip between calling her Jovi and Bryn, just know I'm talking about the same person. She just takes it with like some really lighthearted denial, like, you gotta be kidding me. And he's just like, nah, we grew up together. We were once betrothed. And she's just like, sweet, cool. Moving on. And you're like, okay, um, I guess we won't get that addressed anymore, and it's really weird that you're acting normal about this. Once again, even if you're trying to be an unreliable narrator, and trying to deceive, why would you not, deceive? Um, so yeah, Bryn and Acker escape, okay? And this is where a kind of a sick joke comes in, okay? And there are some sea puns in this book, which I really do appreciate. This one is called, basically, Bryn lives in a place called Urchin Row. Sea urchin row, but also street urchin row. Orphans and people who did not get matched live in this like shack apartment complex looking thing. It's like a row of a shack apartment, kind of diabolical name to call your like row of apartments for orphans and people who just like don't have a place. Urchin row. Um, Crazy idea, right? So apparently it's the greatest place to hide Acker, who is now being actively searched for by guards and people, which also I should mention, I don't think it's ever established why Bryn isn't doing any guard duties in this meantime. I'm wondering if maybe it just happens after the matching ceremony that she gets put on duty, I guess. It's never really mentioned. So I'm just gonna assume that she just gets a vacation after graduation. She's like, yeah, hide here. Of course, this doesn't exactly happen the way it's supposed to. Um, I will say that this book is a lot of romance tropes in a blender. So this feels like a lot like a forced proximity, but we'll get more there in a minute because there's a bigger version of forced proximity coming right after this plot point. Yay. Um, so apparently this is the best place to hide him, and of course, you know, Kai comes forth with some guards and is like, "Let me search your apartment." And Bryn is able to get Acker out of the apartment. He's able to just like slip out the window and onto the roof, and she just like ends up kissing Kai because you know they're a match now, and Acker I guess sees all this, and it's like, okay, moving on. Um, um, flash forward a bit. Bryn decides that the best time to get Acker off the island is to do it during the matching ceremony. And she's just like, hey, do it here, or do it at this point, and nobody will see you, and it'll be all great. And he's like, nope, you're coming with me. And she's like, excuse me, what? No, I can't come with you. I gotta go to the matching ceremony. And he's like, nope, 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 I'm not leaving without you. And she's like, okay, fine, whatever. There's like very little arguments to this, okay? I'm not kidding when I say I probably actually overdid it with how much he just kind of just goes, yep, you're coming with me. And she's just like, all right, whatever. Um, so what I will say is that we do get a really fun part of world building here, where she's being fitted for her dress for the matching ceremony, and it's made custom, and it does show like how resourceful the Laha people are, because they don't get supplies very often. The only time that they do get supplies is when they go on that yearly trip to the port. That is when they get supplies. So not only is it like a rite of passage, but it's also a supply run. However, I feel like it's kind of falls flat because we are only told that this dress is rich in color. And so I'm going to take it upon me. Bryn has red hair and gray eyes. We'll get to that in a minute. Um, and as someone who has like a similar complexion, I would like to think that this dress is either a deep blue or like a like forest evergreen kind of color, because I don't know. I like this personally on me. I don't want to think that it's red because I feel like red can fall kind of weird on us redheads, us gingers, right? Um, so yeah, I feel like the book just doesn't let you like breathe the world. Um, you either really have to make it up as you go, or just exist within a void with some specks of idea and detail as you go along. So she never ends up wearing the dress. I actually looked to see if this might have been an excuse to get her to just escape in a pretty dress, but she doesn't end up wearing the dress. So that didn't work. Um, yeah, so she and Acker escape the night of the ceremony. She and Acker get caught by Kai's father's most trusted guard. Acker reveals to Bryn that Kai has been charm speaking her like her entire life. And it's apparently he has magic and his father has magic, and they have the exact same power of charm speak. So Kai's father is like a century old. He is the reason why the Alaha people are not on the mainland anymore, why they've been banished. Um, and it's because he used his charm speak. What was supposed to be used for good was later used for evil. And so they get banished for that. Because he's like trying to conquest for the entire island. It's just it's weird. It's kind of a weird thing for her to be like, "Oh my god, that's awful." And then like you take this, right? You take this piece, and then when we get back to this plot point in about 400 pages once again, um we will talk about, you know, it's weird. Anyway, so we get this interesting plot point of like justifiably, Bryn is mad that Kai has been charm seeking her entire life because did she actually have a choice to be matched to him, or did he kind of just like coax her into doing it? And like, did he like charm speaker into agreeing kind of thing? Did she actually have a choice in this matter? Which is a really fun, like, or not fun, but like interesting plot point to bring up, is the idea of consent and whether or not she actually had a choice in her love. This makes me so mad though later in the book because it's revisited again and then completely ditched as an idea. And we'll talk about that. There's a fight scene between actor Kai and Bryn and Kai's father's most trusted guard, and this is where Rachel or Schneider actually just shows a pretty decent writing technique she has, which is shock horror. She's able to write some pretty gruesome stuff, okay? And I won't talk about it because I first of all, one, I'm feel like people might be squeamish, but two, I don't feel like repeating it. Um, it's pretty graphic though, I will say. Some things happen with an something's happened and eyes are not where they should be. Um, it's pretty gross. Anyway, what we do notice though is that Acker and Bryn too have the ability to so Bryn gets a hold of one of the knives that Acker has, and it ends up being actually her knife, but that she like forged before her amnesia. And so people from the mainland can forge a knife and then it can become a returning weapon where they can call it back to them. And that's pretty cool. And you think that might be where the metal slinger name comes from, but we'll get back to that later because that's not exactly where it comes from. Like I mentioned, it's named after Acker. Um, and so Acker's able to recall weapons, and so is Bryn. Um, and Bryn's only able to recall back a knife, but Acker's able to call any metal, which is so cool. And I don't know why we didn't get more exploration on this. It's so cool. And I know this is supposed to be a duology, but with the way that this book left off, I don't have faith in us getting any more exposition on Acker's abilities. I do feel like though that whenever Schneider felt like she was losing attention to, or like felt like that she might be um hitting a lull in her writing, that she would hit or she would throw some shock horror into there, and then that's what she would do. Because there are a lot of things that feel very like just kind of placed there to be there. So they escape to sea, and they're at sea for a hot minute. Like I'm not kidding. I think it's like 60 pages or so. Um, and it's so long. It takes forever for them to get back to land. And their original plan is to meet up with Kenta ships that are supposedly just off of the shore. No clue where they went. Like, they're not seen anywhere. And I think actually it would have been nicer had they seen these ships. But they get stranded off at sea and then caught in a storm. And there's a weird kraken thing that saves them from the storm. Turns out, spoiler alert later on, we'll talk about that. It's someone we know. And Bryn's crow friend that she made on the Alaha Mangrove Island, um, tags along, okay? Um, but as she comes closer to land, she starts getting her magic back in full force, which makes her really sick because she's not supposed to get her magic back all like that. Like when people on the mainland get their magic at like 13 or whatever, it's a very gradual process, like growing pains. It's mentioned in the book, which I think is really cool. That's a really cool point, right? It's not meant to be an all-in-one sort of thing. It's meant to be very gradual. So when Bryn gets hit with it full force, as soon as she comes more in proximity to the island, she gets very, very sick. Like dangerously sick.
Hi, editing me here. I forgot to mention that there is a whole section of the book. So basically, so Messer and Kai have magic powers. This is a kind of a spoiler, sorry. Um, for Messer, by the way. But basically, they got it because the king of Alaha basically got a jar of magic dirt from the mainland, and Messer was able to touch it, and so was Kai. And so they got to go through the regular, motions of getting magic, right? But when Bryn touches dirt on the mainland, she doesn't get influenced by the dirt on the Alaha Mangrove Island? Question mark. Which doesn't make sense actually, and I didn't realize that until I was editing, and I was like, wait, I totally forgot to talk about this. So yeah.
Also, while we're talking, Acker was stabbed at some point during the fight, and how he did not get sepsis in the what seems like it might have been like a couple weeks that they were out on sea is beyond me, by the way. Because they didn't have any salve. Like they had a little bit, which is another thing. Oh my god. So apparently they had no salve, and then they suddenly magically had salve. Um, like it's like directly quoted that like basically when Brenda's initially treating his wound, she uses the rest of a salve that's in a random med kit that's on the boat because they didn't grab a good boat. They just grabbed whatever they could find. And there's like a little in the lid that she like tries to scoop out, and that's all there is. And then later on, she's redressing his wound. And apparently, there's just more, and it does say that she uses the remainder of it. Um, Anyway, how Acker wasn't septic at some point is beyond me. And also, when they get back online, he's magically okay. They don't say whether he's got magic healing powers or whatever, but that's what I guess we're gonna go with. Because, like I said, we are left in the dark a lot about these characters and what they do and what this world in general. Okay, it gets really frustrating after like a while because you're just like left to be like okay, but you just contradicted yourself, which this book is full of contradictions, and we'll get there at the end. Um, anyway, so they land in Royston, which is a neighboring country to Kenta, and apparently Kenta and Royston are on really bad terms. They are like really in content with each other. And there is so they get mugged by this group of bandits. And this I feel like this part gets very little exposition because there's not a whole lot to it. Cuz it just ends up being really inconsequential. Cuz the only thing they get from it is that they get to find a healer, but there's nothing like at stake. So they're jumped by this guy that Acker used to know while he was in Kenta and part of like a soldier in Kenta. And the soldier just wants a memory. He's able to look into people's memories, kind of like Dane, and he just wants this one memory of his mother, I think it is, that Acker has, but refuses to give him. If it's just like it's weird. Anyway, and he does it. He finally gives it in exchange for knowing where a healer is for Jovi or Bryn or whatever. And speaking of, everyone in for the book, anyone on Acker's side of the family calls her Jovi, and anyone on Bryn's, like on the Alaha, call her Bryn. Anyway, that's just a random aside there, real quick. So it's not like she has a preferred name. She just goes by both. Um, at this point, anyway, they get mugged. Guy gets his memory of his mom or whatever, and it's very passive. Like they just like oh, and then they get their eyes pecked out by the crow. Segueing, they get to the healer house. Bryn manifests her magic all at once and burns her clothes off. Because, of course. And it turns out that her magic is light. She wields light, which is like really cool, whatever. But also, like, where are we getting Metal Slinger from? Turns out it's Acker's nickname. Because he can manipulate metals, they're calling him Metal Slinger. Crazy. Anyway, um, so yeah, she manifests the power of light, and she's like at the healer's house. They're just like, "Oh, this is so cool," and then all of a sudden, it's just like, "Oh no, this is foreboding. This is the worst news ever," and everyone's like really weird about it. And Bryn's finally like, "Okay, cool. Like, what's going on? Like, why are people weird about me?" Like having manifested light, and turns out the last person who had light as a power like destroyed the world, just like enslaved it all, and was like, "Yep, I'm gonna cause chaos." Foreshadowing, I guess. Um, it's really on the nose. Bryn recovers for a bit. Of course, Acker's there, and he's just like playing like they fall in love, I guess. Like I said, they just don't have any chemistry, so I can't even say they like, fall in love during their time on that boat because there's some cute moments, and then there's just some moments where he's just like, "I hate you," and you're like, "Okay." Um, so, they leave the healer's house, and they end up um being followed by more bandits. And spoiler alert, the crow that was following him, that was Messer. He's a shapeshifter apparently, and he specifically, which this is actually kind of cool. So the giant squid kraken thing was actually part of a Laha folklore, where it's seen as like the big scary, think like boogie monster of the Alaha people. It's like used to scare children, and it's used as like a folklore. It's like it's so cool. It's actually kind of a really cool way to say it because there is like actual, like if you look back in like old folklore, like the giant squid is actually assumed, or like a fisherman's folklore sort of thing, like a folk tale of like giant squids taking boats and stuff like that, which is really cool. That's where we get the kraken from, or what we kind of model the kraken off of. The kraken's actually from Greek mythology, but I digress. Um. Anyway, that was really cool. Here's where it gets weird. So, Messer is revealed to be the crow friend, also the giant squid, and he runs off into this dark forest, literally called the Dark Forest. And Bryn's like, "Oh my god, that's my friend. I need to go after him." And Acker's like, "No, you can't. Nobody leaves the Dark Forest without like nobody leaves the Dark Forest after entering it." And Bryn's like, "Bet. Still, screw you. I'm going after him." And Acker's like, "Fine, okay, we'll go." And as soon as they enter, they're being mauled by bats. And Bryn, out of complete panic, just like incinerates the entire forest. And this becomes a problem, a geopolitical problem. Apparently, you're not supposed to disintegrate the dark forest that serves as the border between Kenta and Royson because Royson will see it as a transgression against Royson from Kenta. Anyway, so Bryn like disintegrates the entire forest, and then she passes out again because she overexerts herself. And she wakes up in a camp and meets Acker's sister named Bo, and I really liked Bo. And then Schneider, like I said, kind of fumbles her, because she goes from being this really, really, really cool, like level-headed, kind of like girl boss, to being like devolved into just like a hey girly pop. And like, there's a difference between being like you can have the balance, like I said, like especially with like when I said with like Acker. Like you can have a balance of, two different character, like you can have duality within a character. But the way that it's never like Bo just never goes back to being like how she was first portrayed. She's only ever Hey Girly Pop. Um after like this one interaction. And she basically starts talking to um she can see people's auras. That's cool. That's cool. And she's like, "You and Acker, we're fated. You're fated matches." And that's basically a bond. Basically, now they can talk in each other's heads. I like a soulmate of you, but in this situation, it's like severely inappropriate. Because like I said, there's a whole like tiff about from Bryn where she's like, "Did I actually ever have a choice?" And like in loving Kai, and then she's like, "Okay, that's cool. Hate that. I'd like to be able to choose." And then she's just like thrown into like a soulmate AU, and it's like, or soulmate trope rather, and you're just like, oh, so she never actually ever has a choice, and it's because like you could be like, oh, well, what happens if she doesn't like end up with him? What if she chooses someone else? And then it's like directly said that like actually no, if you don't, the world will go to ruin. So she's just forced into this. Cool, I guess. Um, yeah. Page 297. Has there ever been such a thing for oh, this is actually with talking with Agger's friend Hollis, who is a they've been friends, they've been childhood friends. And it's mentioned that he's missing an arm, but yeah. Anyway, he's missing an arm. And they're talking about it, and Bryn's like, "Has there ever been such a thing for a match couple not to end up together?" Hallis goes, "There have been tales there've been tales," Hallis says, "and they ended up destroying one another along with everything else around them." Well then, um, cool. Well then is pretty appropriate to that one. She didn't have a choice. So why did you make a huge point about it not being her choice, but then her being like, "All right, I guess this is how it's gonna be." Um, well then is pretty appropriate to that one. Um, yeah. So they're traveling actually right now to the capital of Kenta, bringing her back to the palace. And apparently they kind of wanted to bring her back to Meili, which is where she's from, but they don't. Anyway, at some point during this travel, Bryn learns that she can astral project herself and only be visible to Acker. Um, they use this for some plot plot later on that I just felt was really uncomfortable. But anyway, so she ends up astral projecting herself and finding out that Acker is currently betrothed to Princess Irina of Stro, um, which is another country. So there are four countries. There's Kenta, Alaha, Royson, and Stro, and Meili 5. I didn't count that right. Anyway, um, and so he's currently betrothed to Renostro. And Hollis brings this up. And of course, Bryn doesn't realize this, that she's astral projecting, because she's so confused. And she doesn't know what's going on, because this is her magic, like, manifesting in a way she's never seen before. And she's so freaked out about this. Okay, like, girly, I completely get that. Acker, like, gets mad that she was accidentally eavesdropping on their conversation. He, like, goes and wakes her up and is like, dude, what the heck? Like, and Bryn's like rightfully upset that like he didn't tell her about this. Like he's like trying to pursue like a relationship with her, but then also not telling her that she's currently or that he's currently engaged to another person, which I think is weird, right? And he tries to really play it off and be like, "Oh no, this it's fine. Like I wasn't gonna tell you because I didn't think it was important." And she's like, "This is so important. What the heck?" Um, and he gets so mad at her for like not telling him that like for like one eavesdropping and two not telling him that he she can astral project, and then he accuses her of being a spy. And it's like, you know that she's never dealt with magic before. Why are you getting on to her? But once again, we'll learn later that there's some stuff that's going on that apparently a lot of the book doesn't end up being true. Oh, they end up in a tavern or in a brothel. Because that's a funny way to do it. And I feel really bad because they actually write a pretty decent or Schneider writes a pretty decent reaction from Bo where she's like really freaked out because she gets really overwhelmed by very strong auras around her. So when she's in a brothel, like it's just like straight up horny. Like everyone's just, in the mood. And she's very overwhelmed by this and it kind of causes her to go into a panic attack. And oh my god, when there was only one bed. Crazy. Because they don't realize that they've booked a brothel. Anyway, one bed trope at the counter or whatever. There's like a whole excerpt where at one point they're in the brothel. Hold on. Is this marked here? Yeah, okay. So on page 308, we're at 300 now. A lot of this was traveling. This book is just traveling. Um, and like a lot of just like pointless travel. There's nothing that I can really glean from a lot of these pages. And there's like a difference between having like travel where you're kind of setting up the world, exposition and stuff like that, and having pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of like nothing. Because like I said, Schneider doesn't do a whole lot with actually putting something kind of meaningful within this exposition. There's nothing really you can pull from it. It's not like saying, "Oh, like here's the world around us." It's just here's some stuff that I need to fill some pages out with. So they end up getting back to the Kenta Palace. That's a whole what we went, yeah, hot minute. Um, and as you can tell, it doesn't take very long for news to travel that a new light heir has entered the chat, right? And no one's taking this well, which is fair. The last person who had it kind of destroyed the world. Um, and so obviously people are like rioting in the streets. Not great reception, and she just kind of goes whatever. And someone she gets tomatoed. She gets like tomatoed. As she's going through the streets, and when she's coming up into the palace, she's kind of freaked out. She sees that there's cages of what she thinks are animals, um, hanging from like the front of the walls. Okay, and when we later on, like a few pages later, we find out that it's not animals in these cages. It's people that have not reported that they've manifested magic to the palace, and so they're being executed, which I think is pretty rash, actually. And that's kind of what it's supposed to do, is like set up that this kingdom is not all that it's chalked up to be. Bryn also starts to train with the Kenta guard or the Kenta guards and soldiers to kind of keep up with her physique. I should also mention that I feel like that Bryn has not done a whole lot in this case, like a whole lot of like fighting or really anything that requires like actually showcases her skills that she's acquired through 6 years of training of or 6 years of guard training, 5 or 6 years of guard training. Because it's all kind of given to Acker. She kind of just hides behind him. And like I what for like to her credit in the forest scene, she's like gravely ill. So she can't do anything. I get that. But I feel like there's so many other things where she takes a very passive role within any conflicts to the point where it's just kind of weird. Um yeah. Um people in people in these cages, and they're being executed mostly for not disclosing their magic to the thing, which shows like a bit of authoritarianism. Just stick a pin in that. That's pretty cool. Um, yeah. So now we flash forward a lot. There's a lot of just random. What I will say is that a lot of the conflict in this back half of this book is centers around Acker trying to convince his father to let him not marry Irina of Stro and go back to the original plan of him marrying Bryn. But his dad's like, no, political alliances, Stroh's more powerful than Melee, and we like that better. And Acker's like, that sucks. Anyway, Bryn's also incredibly jealous, which I understand, like, the idea of being upset that you're maybe this is just me. I understand the idea of being upset that you're someone that you're apparently like soulmates with and you were originally engaged to, though you don't really have that memory, is just and also some like actively trying to pursue you romantically, is trying to or is going to marry someone else. And you being relegated to being like a consort. Um but I will say there's a line to that, and maybe this is meant to be very stereotypical redhead fiery temper, and I just don't always identify with that, but it doesn't gel. It just feels like she's just like mad at this girl for no reason. And she's just breathed. And it's like she ends up okay, so there's a point where Acker's attending this like event and Arena Stroh's there, and um Bryn astral projects in her sleep, because this is only what happens. She always astral projects in her sleep into this event, and she notices that Arena is flirting with Acker, and she gets so mad at this, and I'm just like, well, she doesn't know, she doesn't know that she's like, she doesn't know that Bryn's in the picture, right? And doesn't real I don't think she realizes her past. Like knows that Bryn was like betrothed to him at one point. Like that's my benefit of the doubt, right? And so she's done nothing but breathe and like flirt with a guy that she's apparently like that she's supposed to be engaged to. This feels very harmless on her side, right? And like to and like Acker is just kind of nodding along. He's not really doing anything about it, but like what can he do? Also, I guess is my thing. It's like I don't know what he would do to like get her off of him, cuz this is a political thing. You got to be really careful about this. You can't just be like, "Hey, actually, pause. I like this girl more. She's not actually dead. And we were betrothed beforehand, so bye-bye." Like you can't do that. That's war, right? Especially if this is a political marriage. You can't just be like, "Hey, sorry girlie, Bryn. It's me, Bryn instead." Like you can't do that. That's just not you can't do that. Okay? I've read enough period pieces, like period manhwa, right, to know that you can't just do that. Even though they do that in period manhwa, but Anyway, you can't just do that. So he just kind of nods along, and Bryn gets so mad about this. Like, you can be annoyed, but she just like flies off the handle about it. And Acker's just like, well, what was I supposed to do? Which, yeah, true. What were you supposed to do? Um, Another time, Bryn astral projects while he's at this like really important meeting, and um, there's a plot about this because I guess Bryn's projection form is physical to Acker. He can see her and other things. And it's just like it made me really deeply uncomfortable. Cool. Love when it's like technically public. Anyway, that made me really ugh. I didn't like that. Okay, I didn't like that. Maybe you guys are into that, but it didn't gel with me. And I'm trying to be really vague because my parents watch this video, will probably watch this video, and it's like embarrassing to be like, oh yeah, this happened. Um, but yeah, um, the time skip. Okay, this back half of this book does not have a whole lot going with it. It's a lot of court drama, I feel like, and a lot of just really petty stuff. And you know how I was saying that like Acker was trying to avoid talking or trying to avoid political conflict by just like not straight up mentioning Bryn exists because he wanted to take a more political route. Well, that kind of fails. So he tries talking to his dad, and his dad's like, "No, this is a political marriage. I need the Stro alliance more than I need Melee's alliance." Acker takes the chaotic side of this and instead decides that during a congregation of the Stro people and the people of Kenta, he will appear with Bryn instead at Bryn's side instead of Arena's. And Arena is like I said, this poor girl, she just exists. She's just breathing. She just is here. She just exists. Okay, I have so much sympathy to this fictional girl that I barely know anything about because we don't really. She's just kind of there. She's just kind of there. We don't really learn much about her other than she's blonde. Um, which is like okay. Um, and Arena. So Acker is supposed to show up with Arena, but instead he shows up with Bryn and he gives Bryn, I guess like the state jewels that he's supposed to give Arena that like proves that like she's like his betrothed, and he gives them to Bryn instead. And Bryn's like, "Sweet, awesome, like let's crash this." And then they just humiliate Arena in front of like the entire audience. She like shows it's like they go up to the little like balcony thingy, and Arena's at the bottom. She's like gonna walk towards to like greet him, and instead she just sees Acker and Bryn together, and she's just like down here like oh cool right in front of everyone. Okay. And mind you, like I said, she's done nothing. She's done nothing to deserve this. It felt so mean girl. It was so mean girl that, like, I just, I was so mad about this. This part made me so mad. I should mention about, like, I would say a little bit before 2/3 of the book way through the book, I kind of wanted to just drop the book. But then I was like, you know what? I will finish it. I've committed. Um, I will finish this book. But anyway, so Arena's like humiliated, and her entire family's there to see it, and they all just kind of leave, and the rest of the thing goes on without any sort of like addressing the situation, um, until Bryn gives like drinks are served, and people just start dropping dead. Okay, people start dropping dead, and Bryn's like, haha, that was my plan all along. And she sticks uh, a magic nullifying collar around Acker before he even realizes it. And she's just like, I was the villain the whole time. And it's like, what? And this was apparently like a rebellion to bring the Alaha people back on land and also exposing um Acker's dad for his crimes of being the actual villain of this entire thing where he's trying to um control the entire continent and but placing the blame on the Alaha people and throwing the wool over their eyes, which like that's an interesting plot point, but it would have been nicer if we had developed it, a little earlier on in the book, and we hadn't spent so much time traveling, and instead maybe started doing it by showing more cracks within the kingdom and showing more ideas of rebellion within the plot line. Because like I said, this was probably meant to be set up as like an unreliable narrator story, but we don't get any more clues past like maybe a couple of missteps in narrative or an idea of like oh we want to be back on land here and there within the book, and I mean by here and there I mean like 3 times in the book, and then we're just kind of thrown, this is the last 12 pages of the book, this is the last 12 pages of the book, okay, and we're just thrown like a this is I was actually texting my friend saying I don't know how this book is supposed to wrap up because we're like 2 chapters from the end, and are 20 I was like I'm 20 pages from the end of this book and I have no setup for this next book, like what's going on? And she was like, huh, that's weird. And I said, yeah, that is weird. And the yeah, so she sticks a magic nullifying collar on Acker and it's like, sorry dude, anyway, rebellion time, your dad sucks. And Bo's like, yeah, our dad sucks, I'm part of the rebellion by the way. And you're just like, whoa, hold on, what? Because like there's one thing being like okay fine whatever, like maybe we just drop this entire plot for the whole thing, but also how at what point were we even given an idea that this was happening and that behind the scenes, because even within a this book is told within first person singular. So we don't have looks into we're supposed to be getting her entire perspective from this. And it's not like um maybe Catcher in the Rye where there are little bits of just like something's not right here. The entire book is just very the pacing's really poor. You don't if you're supposed to be planning a rebellion, it would be better to put it at the forefront of the book. And if you'd want it brewing in the background, then you should add hinting to this that maybe something was not the way it seemed. Because there's a way of not dropping this in the last 12 pages of your book. Because what? Oh, and there's like a whole. Apparently, she's partnering with the Melee Guard. I just flipped to a random page and was reminded of that. At some point, there was an alliance with the Melee people that she sent off Messer to go do. Um, and there's no, like I said, no actual build up to this. It's just dropped on you. Cool. Um, cool. Also, the stone that they use in the collar, it's called Mangi, I think it is. Yeah, Mangi. Um, and it's like a manji. I don't want to call it manji because manji is like the Buddhist symbol. Mangi. I'll call it mangi. Um, Mangi's mentioned beforehand that Arena's wearing a necklace of it at one point, but it's never mentioned to have like magical nullifying properties. I looked it up while I was like doing the highlights through the Kindle edition for this, because it was really nice actually to have an ebook where I could just like kind of reference and like do searching on like certain plot points that I remembered, but I didn't know what page it was on, so I could like term search certain things. That was really nice. And I might do that from now on whenever I do a book. I mean, just buy the Kindle version, and do it through there. But yeah, manga is never mentioned to be a magic nullifying stone. The cell that in the brig on the mangrove island Alaha Mangrove Island is mentioned to be made of a magic nullifying stone, but also it's not because Acker's still able to smell Bryn's the iron in Bryn's blood. Which the blood blending thing, that's so interesting, because in theory he could bloodbend. But once again, it's never actually explored. Woo! And also, yeah, so that's how that is. The book ends basically being like, yes, we are the rebellion, and then, um, him being like, man, um, he like insults Bryn because once again, they're not actually ever in love. It's just there's no chemistry. There's no chemistry. Ow, okay, that hurt. Anyway, you were so set on Ren being evil, which is Ren's Kai's dad. Kaya manipulating me that you never considered the real truth. I say, bracing my hands on either side of my legs on the table, leaning forward so he can clearly see the guile in my eyes. That I am the bad guy. His eyes shudder, but he recovers quickly. Is that what you tell yourself, he smarts back, that you're the real leader of the Laha Rebellion? I'm here, aren't I? Contrary to what you believe, Acker, your father is the one calling for war. Sliding back from the table, I call my dagger, inspecting the black blade in my hand. He wants to finish what he started centuries ago, gain rule over all of the territories. And then later on, like the same page, surely you see it, Bo says from over his shoulder. Our fathers need to control the gifted, his desire to return the land back to the Dark Ages when the heirs were worshipped like gods. There's no mention of that latter part, by the way. The idea of controlling the gifted is briefly explored within the idea of, like, putting them in cages. That's so cool. That's so cool. I wish we had more on that, but we don't. Um, so that's kind of how the book ends. That's literally how the book ends. It's the last page in the book is oh yeah, we gotta talk about something real quick. This book has blood oaths thrown around like candy. So I can't talk to you about the end of the book without talking about the fact that blood oaths in this book. Bryn finds out about blood oaths, and I swear they're brought up every like 20 pages from the time that she finds out about them, either in conversation or one's being made or one's being mentioned in terms of like actually being active. And he makes blood oaths, or they make blood oaths constantly. Bryn never makes them. Acker always makes them, and Acker makes a blood oath to Bryn, swearing that he'll never bring harm to her. He'll never harm her, and he's kind of stuck to that. So at the very end of the book, he tries to harm. He hurts Bryn. He slaps her, which first of all, hard pass. Don't do that. Don't let anyone hit you, regardless of your gender. Don't let your significant other hit you. That's whack. Acker's like betrayed. but also at the same time, he never had much trust in her to begin with, so I don't know. So much of this book doesn't make sense. Anyway, in terms of his relationships, um, yeah, he slaps her after kissing her, and then he's like, yeah, blood drips from his nose because he slapped her. The oath is returning the favor. Leave, he orders, spittle flying from his mouth. Hallis appears at the end of the hall, and he doesn't come any closer. I sidestep around Acker, the shock of the strike still hot my skin. I keep my eyes on him, and Messer does the same as he slinks past with feline grace. Messer's right now a panther. Um, lifting his upper teeth, lip, and showing Acker his elongated teeth as he passes. Go, Acker shouts, before I kill us both. Bryn apparently feels bad about this. That's how the book ends. There's no real I feel like there's just no real cliffhanger. But yeah, that's kind of that's the plot. That's the plot. That's literally everything. Yeah. So real quick, character stuff. I'm hitting almost an hour on this video. This is gonna be awful to edit. Bryn is pretty odd throughout the entire book. She's never really consistent. She might be an unreliable narrator, but it also might just be typos. Speaking of typos, there's plenty of typos throughout this book. Floating quotations, spelling errors, all sorts of things. You can just look through Goodreads reviews for that one. But the floating quotation, I have a photo of it. That I sent my friend, and I was like, I think that the editor missed this one, which like one or two is pretty standard for a book, but this one had quite a few throughout it. Um, she doesn't really have okay, so Brenda doesn't really have a consistent personality. She takes a background role to Acker throughout most of the book, and it feels like she doesn't really fight much or do really much of anything aside from just be there. Um, see. See. Yeah, she's also toxically jealous. I maybe that's just because it just doesn't jive with me, and I know people who are like have this issue of like just being a little too they need to chill, right? But I like pinged it right off the bat. I was just like, yep, she's not it. Anyway, quoting my thing. Like, yes, I get being upset you were marrying him first, but girly, maybe it's because I've read some of my period drama webtoons, but you can't just brush off someone you're in a marriage of convenience to because it's seen as weakness. Even if it's public knowledge it's arranged, a united front is what the public needs to see, nonetheless. So the whole humiliation thing at the end was just not it for me. Um, crazy. Um, Acker was actually kind of interesting as a character, but that's not saying a whole lot in terms of the actual characters in this book. He still was pretty dull. And I think I mentioned in my video about what I've read. I called him a piece of wet cardboard. It's a shame we just didn't see his magic more often. It's metal bending, by the way. I don't think it's ever really explored much in the book. But it's metal bending, and that's why he has the name Metal Slinger. But the term Metal Slinger is brought up in the actual prose of the book 4 times. 4 times. Um, he's just a very flat character, but I would have actually preferred the book from his point of view. I think the book would have been more interesting and made more sense of the suddenness of the last 12 pages had we read it from his point of view. But essentially we were reading it from his point of view because we had no clue what was going on the entire time, and neither did he. Um there's no chemistry in the romance. I won't talk too much about the nitty-gritty. Um but yeah, there was that whole part with the astral projection. I just skipped the rest of that one. I read what I didn't want to, and then I skipped it because it just didn't sit with me. And if you've read the book, I think unless you're into that, you'll know what I mean. And even then, I feel like that there's a line, even in fiction, published fiction. I do like I yeah. Anyway, do what you like. That's fine. If it if you like it, you like it. But I think this was supposed to be enemies to lovers, but it was very loosely and poorly done. Um, I said, I think there was supposed to be enemies to lovers in there too, I think it was like the La Croix of that trope. La Croix, for those who don't know, it's like a sparkling water brand that's supposed to be flavored, but it's not. It's like an essence of a fruit. And people like to joke that the fruit is like maybe 3 miles away when it's being made. Um, like maybe it was in the building, maybe it was a few miles away when it was being written in. Yeah, the chemistry between Bryn and Kai is pretty forced to the point that I couldn't even tell if it was actually anything between them, even after it's revealed that Kai never allegedly used his charm speak on her. Oh, that's a plot point. He never used it on her, apparently. Allegedly. Like, even in retrospect, I still don't see much of that chemistry. I think they had more than Acker and Bryn, but that's not saying a whole lot. But yeah, I think that's all I got for this. I just really was upset. I gave this book 1 star on Goodreads. I was gonna give it two, a generous 2 stars, but then I texted my friend about it and I was like, hey, I kind of didn't like this book a lot, and here's why. And she was like, girl, give it 1 star. And I was like, okay, I'll give it 1 star. Um, so yeah, that's why I gave it 1 star. This whole book, this whole review is why I gave it 1 star. I will not be reading the second book, unless something possesses me to feel like I should. Um, but as of right now, I really don't want to. It's not slated for release yet, as of my knowledge, but maybe it is. Um, but yeah, I won't be reading it. I don't think I'll be reading it. It's just not my cup of tea. Very lightly. I do. There were lots of parts of this book that I thought were very interesting and had potential to be more like to be had potential, and like the whole idea of like like not trapping people who didn't display their magic, to where do the Laha people, what like more about the Laha people, because we don't get a whole lot about them. We also get like a weird snippet that Acker's mom is apparently not dead, but on part of the Laha people. Oh yeah, okay, real quick. Speaking of Laha people, they have great eyes because they've been away from magic for so long. When they touch dirt from the mainland, that's when their magic awakens. And Ren, which is Kai's father, has like a little bit of dirt like trapped away, and that's why Kai has powers. And Kai brought Messer to the dirt to awaken his powers, but Kai's dad Ren doesn't know that Messer has powers. And Messer shapeshifts into um animals based on a book that he has, and he lives in a very abusive situation with his father, which I think a lot of these dynamics would have been really better, like would have been really cool to explore. But I think a lot of this book could have been cut out in exchange for something different. Like I said, there's a lot of really cool concepts with this book, but it's just the execution and the pacing that I think really makes it fall flat. Which is so sad because, like I said, this like actually seemed like it'd be pretty interesting. And I was so excited when I started reading this book, and then I got about like 2/3 of the way through, and I was like, "Man, this sucks." And I like actually turned to my mom and like, "I think this book is giving me the ick." And my mom was like, "Then why are you still reading it?" And I was like, "Because I have to finish it." And she was just like, "All right, whatever." Anyway, but yeah, I think that's all I've got for this one. I am currently reading The Will of Many. I enjoy it a lot. I've also finished a couple other books on my Kindle since then, that I'll talk about when I do my next reading roundup, which will be at some point within the next month or two. I don't want to do them too often. But yeah, let me know what you think of this video. I know it's kind of rambly because and a little all over the place. I had a script, but I didn't follow it as much because I didn't want it to be too like stiff. Um, I was gonna do a teleprompter, but yeah, I didn't do that instead. I was like, what if I don't do that? But yeah, that's kind of all I've got for this one. Let me know what you think. If you liked Metal Slinger, I'm sorry. You don't have to listen to my review or like it. That's fine. Whatever boats your float, as I would say. If you didn't like it and you have things to add about what you didn't like, you can go ahead and add that below. If you did like it and you'd like to tell me some things maybe that were redeeming about it, definitely let me know as well because I would like to see people's perspectives on that. Like I said, just don't send hate to anyone who likes the book or to Schneider because like, she put effort into this book, right? There were really good, solid ideas in this book. I think a lot of it was maybe it needed a little bit more time in the little brain cooker, right? Maybe a little more time developing this book because I think it could have been really something good. Um, but yeah, that's kind of all I got. Until next time, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. Comment below if you want to. Until then, bye bye. Thanks for watching.